I'd like to discuss some of the specifics and boil it down to really what it'll look like when you're meeting with your Congress members and what you're going to do with the documents that you have. So before I start, I want to mention that every team has a team leader, and those of you that are team leaders, your badge will have a little blue ribbon on the bottom, and everybody else will be part of a team that has a team leader. Those team leaders will be picking up packets over at Advocacy Associates after this, and those packets include a number of documents. On the left-hand side, you want to do that? Thank you, Dean. When they open them up, they will find a congressional listing of the Congress members from that particular state, as well as the RDLA Rare Disease Scorecard, which tells you, which basically grades the Congress members' performance on rare disease legislation. So, as it says, your state scorecard will show you how effective your legislator has been. Unfortunately, we do not yet have grades for this current session. Congressional sessions are 2 years, and the only bill that members of the House have voted on so far was the 21st Century Cures Act. But we do have their scores from last year, and we've included them on the scorecards. So you could find them on there. And make sure that you include the scorecard at some point while discussing rare disease issues. You know, if you think your legislator is strong on issues, then you want to thank them. But you know, if their score is poor, if they didn't, you know, if they weren't in support of 21st Century Cures, or they hadn't yet joined the caucus, it's a good opportunity to find out why, what their concerns are, and you know, it's a good takeaway to understand what our public officials think of this legislation. And you know, at the end, you can always ask them to join the Rare Disease Caucus. It's a good opportunity to have a conversation and bring attention to issues that are important to the community. So a couple of things to remember about the scorecards. The goal is to thank our champions and to reach out to members who either might not be familiar with the issues, maybe they're in their district, you know, their members haven't been as active. You know, there are states and districts that aren't represented here, and we have to remember that there are people there, but those Congress members might not have heard as much, or you might be the first person from that particular district to have this conversation with them. So a legislator's poor score doesn't necessarily mean that they don't care. They're there to listen, and it's an opportunity to educate them on issues that are important to the community. So moving to the asks and the leave behinds, there are 3 fact sheets that are on a counter that's right outside to the left, and it's going to be up to the team leaders to go and grab those fact sheets. They cover, as the bills that you already heard about, the Rare Disease Fund Act, the Patient-Focused Impact Assessment Act, and the OPEN Act. You're going to keep these because it's a leave behind. It's an opportunity for legislators to have something in case they forgot something you mentioned, or you know, if they have more questions that you might not necessarily have the answer to, they could refer to this sheet. So it was mentioned earlier that you know, if the bill's in the Senate, if you're talking to a senator, talk about a bill that's in the Senate. If you're talking to a member of the House, talk about a bill that's in the House. But remember that members of the House have already voted on the 21st Century Cures Act, so it's an opportunity to thank them as well for if they voted yes on it. Again, as Lisa mentioned, staffers are incredibly important in this process. You know, often they remember these policy issues like that. You know, many staffers I've talked to, I was like, whoa, like, you know more about these issues than I do, or the members do themselves. You know, when you're so before you meet with the legislative staff, you want to take an opportunity to work with your team to ensure that everyone gets a chance to speak. Everyone here has a story about how a rare disease has affected their family or their loved ones. And since you won't have a ton of time, it's good to kind of think about how you're going to frame your story and how you're going to move from story to story and then finally make the ask. So keep your short, pass the baton, and make sure that you get your point across. Tell them why the issue is important to you. And again, you don't have to be an expert. I mean, they don't expect you to know all of the pieces of legislation that are before them. I mean, really, that's their job, right? You're there to tell them about how those bills affect issues that are important to you. And you want to make sure that you are respectful of the members. Your legislator might not support a specific bill. They might have concerns from other constituents of theirs, but if they say no, you can always ask them to join the caucus and make sure to thank them for agreeing to meet with you. The more contact that they have, the more times they see your face or your name, the more they can really identify with these stories. And again, as Lisa mentioned, it's only after multiple attempts that they really feel comfortable with it. You want to make sure to prioritize. You want to limit it to 1 or 2 asks. I know, when you meet, it doesn't happen that often, so you want to ask for a lot. But at the same time, as a team and moving from person to person, you want to make sure that you can get short and to the point and to something that legislators can do. And be specific. You want to make sure that they remember what your ask was and are able to have a good takeaway. And finally, when you look at when you're thinking about your leave behinds, you want to make sure that you don't have too much paperwork, that the legislative offices aren't inundated by information. What we want them to really remember is your story and why it's important that they support the rare disease community. So also in your packets, you will find that you'll find patient stories from advocates that weren't able to be here this week. Some states don't have patient stories. We hadn't reached out to, or they hadn't found out about this. They weren't able to submit stories in time, but don't worry about that. Other packets might have many stories, and and each one of those stories is addressed to a particular member. So you want to make sure that you leave that personal story there. So the state packet that includes all of these is going to be shared by your team, and it also includes your members of Congress bios and office locations. And remember that you are also those patient stories' voice on Capitol Hill. The community goes beyond the people in this room, and we want to make the presence of all of those people felt. And regarding the location sheets, they're not always accurate. Legislators move offices a lot, and it's a good idea to look at the office locations in each building. There'll be a small listing. It's easy to find, and you can always ask people that kind of know their way around better than you do. Thankfully, every team member has a team leader that might have some experience on this and be able to help. And you'll find that we list all the members by state. You can always drop by without an appointment to drop off one-sheets. They always have a little inbox. You can just slide it in there, and they do make sure to look at everything that comes in the door, especially when it's personally addressed. So when it comes to the patient stories, for example, those do get read. So if you need a reminder of any of these tips, if you look inside of your agenda booklet and you move to page 42, I had to make it big for everyone because I don't think I could read that. You can find these meeting tips so you can go over them before your meetings or if you forget along the way. And finally, we should talk about the Rare Disease Congressional Caucus. There are 101 members, but we want to make sure that it continues to grow. It's finally a bicameral caucus, so it includes members of the Senate in addition to the House. So if you're meeting with a senator, it's a good opportunity to try and get them on board. Thank your member if they are part of the caucus, and you can find out if they're part of the caucus by looking at the scorecards. There'll be a little check, and it'll let you know. If they're not, you can ask them to join. And again, we want to grow the Senate caucus. So that's all I've got for today. If we'll have a little question period at the end, but if you have any questions after the meeting that you don't get time for, you can always shoot an email. Thank you.